around, and Rod would hide out these characters on this carnival thing. So hitmen, people who were on the run from the mob or with the mob who needed to be traveling around. He'd make phony IDs for these people. And after a few years of this, he's put into Dallas, Texas, where he runs a permanent safe house, where his immediate handler is now Jake Miranda and Jack Ruby.
Oh, my goodness. Well, let's take a step back just to make sure we flesh this out. But the idea being that the mob was actually using carnivals and the carny atmosphere as traveling safe houses. Is that right?
Absolutely correct. Yes. I have some documentation. I have an internal memo that actually names the people who were involved in it, including Rosselli, Delbert Graham, and Rod McKenzie by name.
Yeah. And so the carnival would the carnival would I'm sorry. Go right ahead. There is a code name. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the code name was ZR Flat Store.
As far as the traveling safe houses go?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea being is that the mob would take someone who was hot at the time, who might have just fulfilled the contract that they had, and take them out of society and put them on a carnival on the road. And of course, carnivals only stay a week or so in any one given town. Matter of fact, I understand from your research, you've told people in your speeches that the carnivals also had the ability to kind of get through the underground process of this by kind of greasing the skids with the local law enforcement as well, so they could really hide people as they went.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct.
All right. So that's where Rod McKenzie got his...
Couldn't have said it better there, Michael. Thank you,
buddy. I've been watching your YouTube stuff too much, I think. You know, they're fantastic presentations of exactly what we're talking about, and I want people to really go there to YouTube. And how would they find your YouTube presentations to get some more details of what we're talking about tonight?
They could type in my name, Brian Snoddy. That's Brian. Last name is Snoddy. And type in my name and then type in JFK. And those two videos, The Killers and Cast of Characters, should show up. And you can watch them and you can make up your own mind. I don't tell people what to think. I just provide information that I believe is credible. I may make mistakes. But if I think I'm 95% correct, I try to be anyway. And they can make up their own mind and decide if they believe the government's official story of JFK or if they want to start thinking for themselves and maybe dive into the research themselves.
Well, yes. And you have details in your presentations that I've never heard any other researcher come up with. And I believe that it might be due to the fact that you've run into this actual person who's still living, by the way, who is able to corroborate some of your research in Rod McKenzie.
Yes, that is true. And without him, I wouldn't have done this presentation.
Yeah.
For years, I just kind of dabbled in the JFK stuff. And when I ran into him, which is an interesting story, he really helped me connect dots that I had never heard of before. And he had a new take on things. And when I heard his story, and I didn't believe it at first, by the way, I spent 1.5 years digging into his past before I bought his story. But I do now. I believe that he is 95% correct, and not that he's lying or anything. It's just that he's old. He forgets things. He can't remember how many people were at such and such a meeting or something. He can't remember when things happened. So it's frustrating to get that, and I have to kind of piece together his timeline, and there's gaps in it.
Yeah.
So,
but I think
it's good that there's gaps because there's no overlaps. Which, if there's overlaps, it means he's lying.
Exactly.
but
And
I have
remember-
not busted him on anything. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. You have not found him actually lying in the details that he talks about, it sounds like.
Not one time. I've heard him exaggerate a little bit, and I can catch him on that. He doesn't make things up. If he says this person was here and this is what we talked about, that you can take it to the bank there. He comes up with bizarre details that only through digging through weeks can I find that these things are actually true. And unless he was there, I don't know how you could come up with these details. I really don't.
Well, speaking of the fact that he was there, let's tell Rod McKenzie's story now from what you've been able to piece together.
Okay. Rod McKenzie was a little bit of a rambunctious kid. He's from Massachusetts. Got into trouble a lot. The last time he got into trouble was at age 15 or so. He accidentally, in a high school Halloween prank gone wrong, he accidentally lit his school on fire. And yeah, this got him sent before a judge, but his family had some fairly powerful political pull. And the judge said, look, kid, you're going to join the National Guard, and at age 17, you're going into the United States Army, which he did. So he goes into the Army. He's sent right into the Korean War, right into combat. He's trained as a ranger. He gets out of the Army, and he had his uncle was a famous guy. His name was Uncle John. His name was John T. Benson, who ran an outfit called Benson's Wild Animal Farm. And this is up in New Hampshire. It's defunct now, but at the time it was a popular place. And he was going to go. He had spent summers there as a kid, and he was going to go work for him. And his uncle had passed away. The place wasn't doing well. He wasn't getting along with his family. So he goes back into the Army to re-enlist, not to re-enlist, but to extend for a year. And he wants medical training. So a long series of events. He finally becomes a surgical nurse at Letterman Army Hospital, and his year is up, and he leaves. And that's when he gets involved with William Alexander Morgan, and they steal safes and stuff. They do burglaries on behest of the mob. And when they get in trouble from law enforcement, they run off to Cuba. That's where McKenzie is introduced to a mysterious person named Abe, who gets him involved in making phony IDs, and he's trained for a time at Fort Detrick, Maryland. When he gets out, he's put on that Carnival on the Road, the ZR Flat Store, where he eventually makes his way to Dallas through a long series of events.
And tell us again what he was doing in Dallas and how his connection with the mob was tied there.
Okay, he was running a permanent safe house, which was an old coach house that had been converted into some tiny little apartments. It was right off Holland Avenue. It no longer exists. And his immediate handlers were a guy named Jake Miranda and Jack Ruby. And
really?
He was introduced to he was introduced also to Malcolm Wallace when he was there as well. And he would take in people. There was mostly it was just a day or two they would stay there. Sometimes they would need phony IDs, sometimes not. And he would clean up the safe house, and it was kind of a nothing job. So Ruby and Miranda helped get him a job as a surgical nurse at Baylor Hospital. And it was there in the basement of Baylor Hospital on the day of the assassination in that morning, where he saw Johnny Rosselli and Jake Miranda and spent the entire morning with them there.
Now, that is fascinating right there. The fact that Rod McKenzie was actually a registered, certified nurse in the Army, came out and got involved with the mob, was doing these safe houses on the road. Then they send him to Dallas, Texas to run a permanent safe house. But at that point also, he's got a full-time job, or a part-time job at least, working at a hospital in Dallas, Texas, not Parkland Hospital. This is the other hospital. Is that right?
This was Baylor. Yeah, this was Baylor.
Fascinating. And
Mhm.
why do? And so he actually was a scrub nurse there, working in surgery, and
Yes.
was quite proficient, I understand, at what he did.
Yes, he was trained in the Army as a scrub nurse at Fort Sam Houston. He was trained in the basic nursing things at Fort Sam Houston. He was then sent off to Indochina, which we call Vietnam today, and he helped get those French out of Bien Bien Phu. And his last few months, he was training at Letterman Army Hospital in San Francisco at the Presidio there in actual surgical nurse thing. You know, he lays out the instruments. He has to he hands off the instruments. He has to thread the needles, or the sutures, they call them. He has to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he really liked it. He enjoyed that job, and he said he was good at it.
Okay, interesting. And now you
Yeah.
mentioned the fact that he then, on the day of the assassination, was involved with the mob at the hospital there. Tell us that story.
So he's contacted by someone, and I can't remember who it is, and I don't know if it's Johnny Rosselli personally. He is told. Now, he used to work a shift that was later in the afternoon till about 11 o'clock at night. That's when he gets off. However, he's told to be in the downstairs lunchroom basement of Baylor Hospital at 9 o'clock the day of the killing. Now, he doesn't know anything's going on. And he gets there a couple minutes late, which he said he felt really horrible about. But Johnny Rosselli is there, and so is his his handler, a gangster named Jake Miranda, who ran a steakhouse, amongst other businesses, there in Dallas. And he said he spent the entire morning with these guys. And he said the entire time he was there, Johnny Rosselli was on a bank of payphones, back and forth, calling people. And
So in other words,
around maybe somewhere between noon and 1 o'clock, Johnny came up to him and said, "We will not be needing your services today."
So what did that mean when Rosselli told Rod McKenzie that he won't need his services today?
Now, Rod and I speculate, and this is speculation because we don't know, that Kennedy was going to go to one or two hospitals. Baylor was actually closer, but they would have to turn around to go there. They ended up going to that other hospital, right? And
Parkland.
Rod thinks that he might have been Parkland. Rod thinks he might have been the guy that would have had to put that bullet on that stretcher.
Oh, fascinating.
That's what he assumes, but he doesn't know because he doesn't ask questions, and he doesn't want to know.
Yeah. But the theory is then, with your research, that the mafia basically, and very possibly, had assets working at both hospitals at that time, ahead of time. They had arranged for this, obviously, to use them in this kind of a hit.
I think so. Because Rod was already at the hospital, they had him. Of course, the mob could pay anybody off enough to go in and do something. But since Rod was already working there, because when Rod got the safe house job, he knew it was going to be what he calls a nothing job. He says there's nothing to do. You got to go to the store. You got to buy some food. He says maybe you have to clean up a little bit. You have to go buy him a shirt or something. He said it takes no time, and he didn't want to sit around and get bored, and he liked medical things. So he asked Miranda and Ruby, he says, "Can you get me a job at one of the local hospitals?" He says, "I have training by the Army, and I can do the job." And he goes, "I like it. It keeps me busy." And they said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll get it for you." And they did. And through a doctor, here's another name, a Dr. Robert Sparkman. Look him up. And apparently Sparkman was involved. He owed some debts to the mob, whether it was coups or money. He doesn't really know. But Sparkman got him the job, and when Sparkman met Rod, he knew what he was talking about, and he said both of them got along just fine.
Fascinating. So let's get back to Johnny Rosselli. and